Okay, who needs me on my A game today? Okay, those people do. Time to get up. And you just get up because you're pulled by yourself, not from something outside. You're pulled by yourself because you ask yourself that powerful question. So that's the process of push coaching, is finding those questions that are going to fuel you, that don't necessarily mean anything to me, but they're specific to you, if that makes sense. Because I don't know what's going to get you to show up, but what I can is I can ask you questions and we can find out what's important or meaningful to you. That's one of my biggest ones, is like, what is important or meaningful to you about even doing that, right? It could be our police career. If somebody's starting to get burned out from their police career, I'm going to be like, what about being a police officer is important or meaningful to you? Like, what kind of impact is that making on you, on your family, in the world? And when you reframe that, it's much harder for you to like poo-poo it, to go like, no, this is the reason why I do what I do. This is the reason why I signed up. This is the kind of impact that I made. This is what I'm showing my family. This is what I'm helping with the community. And now you're coming from a different place. I call it our heart voice. You're coming from a different place of like purpose, of potential, of abundance, of hope. And you're like, yes, I'm going to go out there and do that. And so that's really what not only push coaching, but what the book is about, is like getting yourself to ask yourself those questions, to get yourself to really show up.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this. My first thing I'd like to say is we share something in common. We both have children that spent quite a few weeks in the NICU. Mm-hmm. I have 3, and one of my, all 3 of them were in the NICU. One ended up spending almost 4 months there, so I can definitely relate to your story with that.
Yes.
It's definitely trying for a parent to know that your child's in the NICU, so I definitely relate to that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that was a tough 73 days for not only me, but my wife. And I mean, that was like probably one of the main reasons why I got into what I'm doing right now, because that's the point when I had decided like rock bottom had happened. Because of that, because I wasn't physically or mentally prepared for that. I was just like, it's going to be like everything else. You know, I'm working this busy, crazy career. I have all this stuff going on. And then before I know it, I'm just going to have a kid, and the kid's going to come home and everything's going to be great. And it was at that point that I'd realized that, like, before that, I knew that my health was out of alignment. I knew that I was giving too much to my work and to my career, but it had only affected me. And it's when you realize that your actions are affecting other people, specifically my son who wasn't born, because I like went down this spiral of like actually developing shingles after that. I mean, I couldn't show up for him. Like he needed me to show up, and realizing that I had done that and I had let it down because I wasn't making my health or my family a priority. That was like that rock bottom moment where I was like, okay, something's got to change. And then it was just a matter of finding that thing that was going to work for me.
So before we go down that path, then we'll definitely get there. I want to kind of start at the beginning. Where's hometown? Where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Pennsylvania. When I was about 6 years old, my dad, I had an uncle that was living in Los Angeles. He decided it was going to be a good idea to just pick up the family and move here to Los Angeles. And so I was about 6 years old. I try and remember my childhood, and I don't have many memories of it. And I don't know if it's because it's like locked out or what, but I just remember being with my brother a lot and my parents not really being around much. They were always those hard workers. My dad was an LAPD officer. He came over here. He got a job. There's like the 1984 Olympics. I just remember him wanting to be a police officer for that. And he was always at work. My mom was always at work. And I don't really have that many memories, which is probably why when I was 10, 11, they got divorced. And I remember I actually sat down one time to think about how many different homes I lived in. There was like 13 or 14 different times when I had to move, change schools, or get switched between my mom or my dad because they were fighting over me and my brother in court. And I just remember all the time them not being there. And I really have like, you know, when you have those moments where you're like, I'm never going to allow this to happen to me. And then because you went through it, for some reason, it happens to you. It's like I manifested it. That's when that moment happened with my son, where I was like, I'm actually doing the exact same thing. I'm working so much. I'm putting all of my emphasis in this area of my life that I'm kind of forgetting this most important area for me. And it gave me that realization that I needed to make an adjustment for that. So when I think about like my childhood, I don't remember many things other than when I was 13, I got my first paper route. When I was 14, I was working for, what was it? It was like a place, a greenhouse to water plants.
Okay.
At 16, I went to go work for Magic Mountain. At 18, I was working at a movie theater, and then I went to Universal. It was this constant of like work, work, work. That's my way out, right? I can either be home with my brother, and I remember seeing like having the refrigerator, there was like either beer and mustard that was in the refrigerator. But if I wanted to create more, if I wanted to be able to bring some extra food home or extra money, then I had to go out and work. And so I think that's where that work ethic for me started to be instilled, is like, hey, you got to go out, you got to, create this for yourself, bring it home. So that way I could help not only support him, but help support my dad and while he was at work and all that stuff. So I feel like a lot of that, my childhood, actually, I started to manifest into my own adulthood.
So your brother's younger than you?
3 years.
Almost kind of sounds like you took on a little bit of a parent role while you guys were kids.
I definitely do feel like that. Like looking back at that, I wish I was a little bit more of a parent role for him. We went in totally separate directions. I went the direction of the police field. He went the direction of running from the police. And we have completely gone our different paths. But yes, I did feel like I had to look after him. I felt like I had to protect him. I had to keep him from going down that path of peer pressure and all that stuff. I don't think I did a great job, but I did the best I could with what I had, right?
But at the end of the day, it wasn't, even though you kind of fell into that role, at the end of the day, it wasn't your responsibility to ensure that he grew up well. It was your parents' job.
Right.
That shouldn't have been imposed on you. As far as you said, you were working from a very young age, but what about extracurricular, involved in sports, that type stuff? Or
yeah, early on I was involved in baseball and soccer. So that was up until my parents got divorced. I was really heavy into baseball, into soccer. Having that team kind of atmosphere was something that was very positive. I don't know at what point I stopped doing that, but it started to get to the point where I was just doing whatever I could to make more hours so that I could go in and get paid more and to work more. And it was that spinning wheel of just consistently working, burning out, and starting it really, really early. So I deterred from playing baseball, playing soccer, all those kind of things, playing football in the street. I don't know if they do that anymore nowadays.
Doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't. I remember just grabbing the Nerf football and just going out and playing out there. But it shifted more towards, well, I could either do this or I could work at the greenhouse. I could either do this or I could work at Universal and get some kind of, at the end of the day, some money so that we could do all of these other things that we want to do. And so it really went down that path.
Starting to work from such a young age, what was at that time through high school, were you looking at your future and what were you kind of were you already leaning towards law enforcement, or did you have other plans?
Yeah, great question. So whenever my dad would take us places, it'd be me, my brother, him. He had a couple different wives, so I had a couple different stepmoms. But he would always quiz us while we were driving over there, police stuff. Okay, so if somebody was drinking on this side of the beach, what would they be arrested for? What could you cite them for? And do you have any other ideas of what you could ask this person if you want to find out if they stole something from the store? It was this constant game in the car. I actually loved being in the car because I knew that some game was going to happen and I would be asked these questions. And I love puzzles, which is probably why the police career really worked out well for me. But it really instilled in me yes, I want to do this. And I would hear stories about him on the Venice Beach detail and people he was chasing and all this kind of stuff. And it was really exciting to hear him talk about these different, positions that he was in, undercover, all that stuff. So it really drew me into that life because of the questions and stuff that he would ask us inside the car.
So it was kind of more his prompting through these questions and stuff that kind of drove you towards the law enforcement realm.
100%.
So between high school and starting law enforcement, did you go to college or anything?
I did. I went to CSUN while I was working security at Universal Studios. So I was going during the days to college, and then I was working the graveyard shift as a captain at Universal Security they have there, and really trying to manage both of those so that when I got out of college, that I would be able to go right into the police career.
And so what year did you start law enforcement?
2002.
2002. So you're coming up on your 20.
Yes.
Getting close to transitioning out?
I am definitely getting close to transitioning out, that's for sure.
Well, then that's, kind of kismet that you're going to end up being a guest on this because you got your own plans, but you've already got stuff in place. So going into your story, like you talk about in your book and on your podcast, you got to a point where you were 100 pounds heavier than you are today.
Yeah.
While you were a police officer.
No.
Mm-mm.
So I was 100 pounds overweight prior to becoming a police officer. And my thing was, at that point, I was willing to do whatever it took to get to the point that I could join the police career. So I lost some weight, did not do it in a very controlled or healthy manner. And once I got on the department, I was up or down, 40, 50, 60 pounds. My biggest weight was 267. And I remember because I was working Universal Studios, it was about 6 months prior to graduating. I had made all of these excuses in the world. Well, I'm going full-time here and I'm working grave shift and I'm trying to do school, so I don't have time to do all this, even though at the time I was playing video games. I was doing all of these things on my days off, right? So I had convinced myself I didn't have time to do anything. It was about 6 months before I was supposed to go into the academy, and I stepped on the scale and it said 267, and I'm like, what happened? Because I was 160 when I got out of high school, and now I'm 267. And so it was a matter of like, okay, what do I have to do? Well, I have to not eat, I have to run, and I have to work out every single day for 2 hours a day. And I'm kind of like the person who goes all in or not at all. If you can't tell.
It's either 0 or 100 miles an hour.
100%. And so I went in 100%, and I ended up losing, I'd say maybe 35, 40 pounds before I got into the academy, not in a healthy way. So I still felt terrible. I made it through the academy, and it was kind of funny because a lot of people thought I was in really good shape. And I wasn't. It may have appeared so because I had lost a little bit of weight, but I was still not in not a physical, but also a mental state that I needed to be in. And so it was that after getting on the department, it was the up, down, until finally when the issue with my son came up, that I realized that yes, it's I want to physically look better, but my mentor says, your outward success is a reflection of your inner growth. And so for me, what I had realized is I was trying to fix the outside, but in reality, I needed to go on the inside, fix this, and then the outside will just happen on its own. And so that was that realization of just trying to lose weight. That's not the answer. The answer is finding the answer inside, really growing and developing just the type of person who does this normally. And then you just get into that habit, and it's not even a matter of you don't even have to think about it anymore. It just happens automatically. And that's kind of what it is now. But it took a lot of time. I know I have this book that I wrote about it. And this is probably 1/100th of all the stuff that it took for me to go through a bunch of different things to figure out what worked. But really, it was that personal transformation inside that led to that outward success, if that makes sense.
Now, you talk about your son's health or being in the hospital as kind of the final catalyst for you to kick your own life in gear, no better term. How much of it, how far into it did you get into on your own before you then cross that bridge into getting a mentor?
Oof. That's a great question. So I feel like there was mentors that were positioned in my life along the path that I didn't even realize were mentors. One of them being a Lieutenant Tom Smart. He used to run our gang impact team. So I was a gang qualified court expert. I was the person you call any hour of any day, and I would give you all the stats and where these people were located, what they were called, and all that stuff. And I always remember him still making his family and his health a priority, but still really doing a amazing job while on duty. And so he really helped to mentor me, but I think a lot of it was also looking at him, how he had set himself up and the behavior that he was modeling, that you don't necessarily need to have a conversation with somebody all the time for there to be mentoring. You can see through their actions that this is possible, right? So if you see somebody who's in the police career who's in great shape and they have a great connection with their family and they're not having to work massive overtime like that, for me, it's it's possible, right? It's I just got to find those answers. But like you said, it took me a little bit of time to go, you know what, maybe I should ask for help. I mean, I hear this over and over and over again. I work with a lot of police officers now, and a lot of us kind of like talk ourselves into just doing it ourselves, right? Like, I'm the person that goes out and helps people, so I shouldn't have to go out and be that person who asks for help, right? That makes me the victim. And I see that a lot, and a lot of it seems to be stemming around, like, I know for me personally, it was my ego. It was like, no, I can figure this out. I can figure this out. And it wasn't until I started to reach out and connect with a coach, connect with somebody who was like, hey, you know what? You've been down this path before. Can you kind of like point out some of the places where I shouldn't go? And maybe you can give me a little bit of a direction of how I can take this. And it was at that point that I actually got involved in personal development. So like reading podcasts, like finding like people who've left like great wisdom along the way because they've traveled that path before. And you can like pick up a book and get mentored by somebody you never have an opportunity of meeting. And so that was the initial thing that ultimately led me down to speaking to a real human and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. What are some of your ideas? And then realizing what's crazy is when you do that, you don't realize, number one is like, they know how it feels because they were there. But number two, there's like thousands of other people who have that same exact thing, who have different strengths than you, who can actually, you can build off of. And it just feels like you're a part of a community. Like before it was like, oh, it's only me who's struggling with this. I'm the only one who's doing this. But when you realize that you just come out and you open it up, you realize how many more people are struggling with that, and that you can work together synergistically because everybody has different strengths to really like level up each other exponentially. And that's really what got me down that path of starting mastermind teams, being around people who are heading in the same direction. They have similar goals and values. And when you put yourself in a room like that, it gets you to level up your standards. And then you start doing the things that you feel are like the reason why you were put there, like your purpose, like, hey, I'm heading in this direction. This is where we're going. Everybody else is going in that direction. It doesn't feel awkward or weird to be, I don't know. For us, it's like when you go out to Code 7 or lunch, you'll go out and you'll eat whatever it is you're eating, right? Whether it's pizza or whatever. Like, it was weird for me to be the only person to be bringing my food in while the entire squad room is eating a whole bunch of nasty food. But when I aligned myself with other people who were like, you know what, food is important to me, family is important to me, it was much easier for me to go in there because then I'm looking around and I'm like, oh, all these people are just like me. It's the same with family. So when I was going, hanging out with people, and by the way, this is no knock on people. This is like everybody's priorities, right? They would play poker. They would play fantasy football. They would do all of these things, softball, all these things, spending time away from their family when they get off duty so they don't have any time for their family. It was very easy for me to get sucked into that, right? And playing poker and doing all those things. But there was also a group of people over here that were like making their family a priority. They knew what their kids were into. When they got home, their kids, some of them are teenagers, still like enjoyed the fact that they were coming home that day and they wanted to go on walks with them and do all that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, so if I start hanging out with these people, right? A team of people who have the same values as me, it's just so much easier to take the actions that you need to take because it's just everybody's doing it. And it's just a matter of figuring out like which team do you want to be on? Not because there's any wrong team, but because I'm going to take ownership of which one of these teams I'm going to talk to. And if you start hanging out with these people, it's much easier to do those actions because that's what people talk to me about all the time. It's like, Mark, how do you get yourself to take action? How do you get yourself to keep showing up? How do you get yourself, like, despite all of these things, to like think about things differently? And they think it's like a secret, but really it's like, well, who are you spending your most time with, right? Are you reading books? Are you growing? Are you around the right people? Or are you over here? Because this is much easier, and it's not really a trick, but it's like you've got to be taking the ownership of who you surround yourself with.
Well, and you bring up a good point about and you refer to it as two teams, but it doesn't necessarily have to be two teams. You can find a balance between going out and playing softball with your teammates or your workmates, but still finding time to balance being with your family. And you bring up a great point, is it's our ego. The job draws in strong-willed, strong-egoed people. You need that for this profession.
Yeah.
But that also tends to be our biggest detriment because, like you said, we don't ask for help. We don't want to admit that I can't do this on my own. And that's where I think a lot of us tend to fail is because we tend to isolate ourselves and think, I can get through this on my own.
Right.
And you need to be able to reach out. When you decided to change your life, did you just attack the fitness aspect, or did you attack, okay, I not only want to be healthier physically, but I also need to be a better parent and a better family to a spouse? Or did you just attack the one area?
That's a great question. So for me personally, I attack just the fitness area. Like I said before we started recording, I'm all or nothing. I'm like, hey, I'm going in 100% or I'm not going in at all. For me, it was, okay, I need to get my health under control. Once I got the health under control and I realized personal development and who I hung out with was an important piece, I was like, okay, I was able to conquer this. Like, what's next? And so for me, it was my family. First, it was becoming a better husband. I was like, I want to become the kind of husband that my wife really deserves. And so I joined a team of people. I found people who also wanted to become incredible husbands. Unfortunately, it wasn't inside my police career. I had to find people on the outside because there's so much growth that is experienced, yes, inside of our police career, but also outside of that, getting in contact with other humans who don't necessarily work in our field. And so I found a group of husbands who were just trying to become better, trying to learn how to navigate that, especially with all the things that we have going on in business and career and all this kind of stuff. And then I was, okay, I'm doing better over here. How can I become a better father? Then it was like, okay, how can I take this now? How can I actually have a business out of this? How can I grow in business? Because here's the thing, being a police officer and being a business owner is a entirely 180, right? You think that you have some of the ideas because you get to sell people into handcuffs. It's an entirely different sell when you understand marketing and Facebook and podcasts and all this kind of stuff, right? And so I did the same thing. I was like, okay, how can I really excel over here? And so same thing. I joined groups of people. I found people who not only made their business a priority, but also made their family a priority. Because here's the thing, you're going to see a million different business ads and stuff out there to join masterminds. All of them are amazing, but you got to make sure your values are in alignment with them. I refuse to allow my business to take over these other areas. I know you do too, because we were just talking about this, right? It's like, I want to excel in business, but never at the cost of my family. So my goal last year was I wanted to 5X my business while creating more memories with my family than I ever had before. It wasn't a or, it was no, an and. And what happens is when you program your brain to find that answer, you'll find it. When you're like, how might I do that? Your brain is now open to listening to podcasts like this, to reading books, to finding different answers that are out there, as long as you don't close the door saying, hey, I can only be good at my work or this. I can only be good with my health or be a good father. When you start asking yourself, how can I be amazing at both? Those answers will start presenting themselves to you. And so that's kind of what happened is I asked myself, well, how could I be better at being a better husband? The answers presented themselves. Not that day, but as I continued to go, I was looking around and going, hey, that might be something that might be in alignment with that. And it's the same thing with business. And I've used it for so many different areas now. It's kind of like a universal thing is you just program your brain by asking yourself powerful questions, which is why I wrote this book. It's the art of self-coaching, asking yourself questions that fuel you to find the answers rather than handcuffing you and basically closing the door saying, this is the only way that it has to be. I mean, I talk to people all over who believe that because it's so busy at work, there's no other way. I have to work this overtime. I have to do this. And when you have to do something, even feeling that in your body, when you say you have to do something, it feels like shit. It feels like I don't want to have to do anything. I want to get to do something, right? But and even just that word will change the way it is. And if you can reframe it into a question, you'll be able to get those amazing answers. And they were there the whole time. It's just you were not open to accepting them when they presented themselves. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure for all of us, law enforcement, military, first responders, if you're attacking the physical fitness side of your life, we all know how to do it.
Yeah.
We could figure that out on our own. It's not until if you want to cross the line and get involved in competition or something that you might seek a mentor. Did you start down the path of trying to be a better father and spouse and just get to a point where you didn't feel you were improving? Or did that lead you to a mentor?
Oof. So when I thought about me being a better father and a better husband, I didn't know what that would look like. So one of the questions that I like to ask people is when they think they want to spend some time in a certain area growing, I ask them okay, what does success look like to you? If I say that I want to be a great husband, what does that mean? I mean, it's different for everybody. What you're going to tell me is different than what I think is a good husband, right? And so I didn't really know what that definition was. I knew what it wasn't because growing up, I didn't want to be that parent that was never there for my kids, right? So sometimes you got to go, okay, I know that that's not what I want to do, but what do I want to do? And so it was this search of what would success look like to me? What would it feel like to me? What would it what can I create And who can I find to help me create that? And because I didn't have any like role models that I could point at and say, oh, hey, this is what I can do. I started to go out there and started to figure out how to do that. I knew that there were some people who were better at it than others, but I also knew that there were some techniques. I knew there was some mindset, because there's always mindset with everything we do. And there's some tactics that we can employ to make that a little bit better. And what's kind of funny is it's always the same ones. It's always mindset, and it's always like asking great questions. I mean, even, let me give you an example. So a lot of us have conversations with our family that are very surface level. How was your day? And it's like one word answers. Good, great, right? Instead, like what if you are at the dinner table and I'll turn to my daughter and say, what made you smile today? And now she has to go back into her mind, because there's a lot of things in that question that you don't really understand. It's like, first off, I'm saying that something made you smile. I'm assuming it. Now I'm telling you what made you smile today. Now you're going to go back. You're going to think about it. You're going to re-experience it, because every time we re-experience it, we rethink about it, we have those same feelings in our body. So my daughter's going to turn to me. She's going to smile, and she's going to say, this happened at school, and this person did this and this and this. And it's just, she's inviting me into her day, not just saying, hey, how'd your day go? Oh, it was good, Dad. Okay. Got any homework? Okay. And so this level of asking questions can create like that really deep connection. And so that's where like being around people who were looking to create that kind of connection, they were teaching me things like that. Like, oh, you could just ask these better questions that are deeper questions, and you'll feel more connected at the end of the day. And I do. I mean, I go on a walk with my daughter for 45 minutes. I was doing the 75 hard. And so my second outside workout was like 45 minutes walking around. And I was just getting really good at asking questions, right? I mean, I've heard you from the beginning of the podcast till now, like even you're like really developing as a great question asker, right? Same thing. I was just going out and just asking her all these great questions, and she'll come back. She'll be like, Dad, that was a great conversation. I'm like, I didn't even say anything. I just asked some questions, but it just really invites you in, right? And so it was learning skills like that, but then understanding like the mindset behind it is like, I just really want to connect with her, and I really want her to feel like she can tell me anything, and I won't react in a way that a police officer dad acts, right? Because then how is she going to come to me in the future?
Separation, though, to put yourself in.
100%. But because I know that there's going to be things in the future that are going to happen that she's probably not going to want to tell me, but I want her to be able to come tell me, because I want to be able to help her if I can, right? Rather than being that person who's reacting, who's not creating that like psychologically safe environment where she doesn't want to tell me because I don't know what Dad's going to say. I don't know what, it still happened, right? It's going to happen. Right? It's a matter of, is she going to be coming to me and saying, hey, Dad, this happened? I'm like, okay, how can we do, what can we do here? Like, what can I do to help you? Or what's your plans in terms of like what you're going to do about this? And just really asking more questions to kind of have her come to her conclusion. But really it's I want to create this environment of really great connection, so they feel okay coming and tell me when they do something wrong or when something goes sideways, because you know it's going to happen, right?
Well, and the funny thing is, as parents, we all have said that at some point in time. I want you to be able to come to me with anything. Right. But if you don't create that environment where they feel comfortable coming to you, you can say it all you want. And I'm a living example of this. I'm dealing with teenage kids now who don't want to talk to me sometimes.
Yep.
And it's a struggle for me. But I have to take ownership and say it was also part of the things that I've done and said in the past that have created an environment where maybe they don't want to come talk to me. Right. And I'm working on improving that.
Right.
Another question I have, though, is when you were making these changes, and this may sound like a silly question, did you ever go to your spouse and ask her what she needed from you to improve?
Great question. So in that process of going out and getting mentored by men who were trying to improve their marriage, that is one thing that you do often, because like you can have these ideas of what a perfect husband should be, but how about asking your significant other, right? It's like so many of these things, they go unasked. It's kind of like these expectations or these instruction manuals that we think that everybody's supposed to know about, right? That we never tell them about. So 100%, I would go to her.
You didn't get the manual when you got married on how to be a good spouse?
Yes, I did not. I didn't know emptying the dishwasher was in there.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
But really, like, I would ask her some key questions like, hey, when you feel most loved by me, what is it that I'm doing or what is it that I'm saying that makes you feel that way? And really, that first time that I asked her that question, I could see on her face was a little awkward because normally your husband doesn't come up to you and go, hey, when you feel most loved by me or when you feel most supported by me, what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm saying that makes you feel that way? And she knew that I was going to school to be a better husband. Because I tell my kids that too. I'm like, hey guys, my mastermind calls on today. It's time for me to go to school to become a better father. And like, Dad, you're such a good father. I'm like, no, I've got to be better for you. I've got to be better for you. And I got to continue to learn. This is not something that you get to the point and you just graduate, right? And I want to instill that in them too. Like, hey, it's important for you to go to school to also be good for your spouse, good for your kids and stuff like that. But like asking my wife that question, really, she was like, taken back for a second, right? And then she shared with me some things and it was like so obvious. I'm like, oh man, like for some reason, the opening of the door, that's a big deal for her. Like opening the door to get into the car. For me, it was like, I'll just open the door sometimes or whatever. But she's like, for her, it really did feel like, wow, he really cares for me. He's willing to come over to my side, open the door. I'm like, I'll do that every day if that's what, you feel most loved by me. And even things like when I was asking like, hey, when you feel most supported by me, what is it that I'm doing or saying? And then I'd also ask, hey, when you don't feel supported by me, what are some of the things that I'm doing or saying? And I realized that when we were having, like I was talking to the kids or something like that, like I would make mention of something and it would make her feel like I was not supporting her and that I should just get behind her because, she had made a different decision with the kids. And I didn't realize it was that big of a deal. But if you never ask that question, you never know. And that's where the disconnection comes, right? And so really having these conversations with her, and it's not a one-time thing, right? You can actually get the response from her and then go, oh, I know exactly what to do. And then when those opportunities present them later, I'm like, yes, this is me. And it's weird because she told me what to do to make her feel loved. And in those moments, she knows she told me, but still it works. Does that make sense? So I go over and open the door and I just smile at her and she knows she told me, but at the same time, she's like, yes, he loves me. And it's weird that we have these kind of like manuals or we have these things, but it's not something that we necessarily need to fix, but we need to bring them to light. A little bit of a different note is I did the same thing with my kids. And I want to give you this little exercise. Maybe the listeners can do it if they have family, because this one is a game changer for sure. So what we did is we took this really big, or those kind of boards that you write on when you're doing training. And what we did is we blocked it off into 4 blocks because I have 2 kids. It's a dad on one block, mom on one block, Andrew on one block, Alyssa on the other. And what we did is we said, okay, everybody gets a different color Post-it. Now, the question that we're going to ask you is, when you feel most loved by me, what is it that I'm doing or saying that helps you feel that way? And so when we go to dad, so what are some of the things that dad does that you feel like really loved by him when he's doing or saying? And so my son would write all this stuff down. My daughter would write all this stuff down. My wife would, and they would take the Post-its and they put it under my name. And then we go to mom. And then we go to Andrew. And then we go to Alyssa. Okay, everybody, what does Alyssa do or say that makes you feel loved? And we would all write it. After that, you get the Post-its on your name and you get to look through it to see, like when I do this with my kids, that's when they feel most loved by me. And it's the weirdest, smallest things. It's not like when you're buying me presents. It's not when we're going to Disneyland. It's like my son was like, when you play tickle with me on the floor. And I'm like, are you serious? Like I've said no to that so many times because I'm tired from work. Yet that is the thing that comes into his mind when he's like, this is what when dad does this, it means that he loves me. And the same with my daughters. Like when you get on the floor and play Unicorn Princesses with me, I'm like, are you serious? Like I've talked myself out of doing that. But now that I'm present, anytime he's like, hey, you want to play tickle? Or she's like, hey, you want to do this? I'm like, I'm all in. Let's go, right? Because that's that moment. And so you can set yourself up by asking these kind of powerful questions. And now you're going to have those opportunities presented to you in the future. Like when they want to do those things, you're going to be like, yes, I will do these things because you know how powerful they are to them. So really it's this art of asking great questions, and it's through health. It's through business, it's through your family, it's through business or through your career. You can ask yourself really powerful questions to find answers that are like living on the inside of you. It's just a matter of you asking those powerful questions. And
in listening to your answer, what I'm drawn to is we're all in professions, law enforcement, military, first responder, whatever, who we get an annual evaluation. And we're always looking for, what do I need to improve to make the next rank? Mm-hmm. We never do that in our family. We never sit down, and I'm not talking to the extent of once a year, but We never sit down with our spouse or our children, and it's about checking the ego and have the vulnerability to say, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to improve? So it's almost like operating a business with your family.
100%. And you hit on a very, very solid point here. For some reason, it's okay to go to 990 hours of training to become a police officer. You go on the field, you don't know what the hell you're doing. You're assigned to an FTO for that first year. You get off there, you start to work with your partners. You still don't have any idea. But then you get a kid or you get married and you're expected to either know it all or figure it out on your own. Like, how much time and energy do we put into training? Do we put into like our career to like developing ourselves there? And we just expect it to happen automatically. Oh, I'll just learn how to become a better father, or I'll just learn how to become a better husband. No, you got to go to school. You got to do that. Just like for me, it's even more important, because if I'm solid at home, if I'm solid in my health, I'm going to be the best police sergeant that I can possibly be while I'm here, because I'm not having to worry about that stuff. I've already got that stuff taken care of, right? And so it's this great synergy of all of it. But really, when you think about it, like, how much energy and time and training and resources have you gone in and put into your career? And are you putting that into your other areas of your life that are most important? Maybe it's not family for them. Maybe it's not business. Maybe it's not. But how about those other areas? Are you putting in that same amount of time, energy, and effort there? Because it's the same thing. You've got to develop the skills and the mindset to become the best that you can become there.
When you decided to go seek assistance from, well, the way you explained it was you realized you needed to be a better spouse, a better father, but you weren't seeing it to where you could model it off of coworkers. So you went looking outside. And I think that stresses the importance of having a good work-life balance. We need to have a better social circle of a variety of people. But for you, where did you go looking for those mentors, those resources in the early days?
Great question. So I programmed my brain to ask myself, okay, how can I become a better father, and who might help me in that journey? And I programmed it to put myself out there to like look for it. And it happened by a podcast coming across my newsfeed called the Dad Edge podcast by Larry Hagner. That podcast, I listened to the first one, and I was like, I'm binge listening to this. And as I was going, I was just listening. I'm like, wow, these are great, not only tactics, but really great mindset that I really want to employ. And then I got to a certain podcast episode where he's like, hey, we have this mastermind team. And I was like, are you serious? Like, it was there all the time, but I hadn't like asked myself, like, how am I going to become a better father or a better husband? And who's going to be able to help me do that? And when you do that, you're now looking probably in the same places it was there all the time, right? It didn't just immediately show up, but now I was like, I was attuned to looking for the answers. So many people are like, well, where do I have to go to find it? And you've got to put it out there, and you've got to see like all the different things. It's going to present itself. And then you're going to have to make the tough decision of going, okay, I'm going to jump out there. I'm going to do this. I'm going to join the mastermind. I'm going to pay money for this, do whatever it is. But it's like you're just putting it out into the world, and your brain is now going to want to close the loop. We don't like those open loops, right? Like at the end of from one show to the next show, you know how they're like, it's like teetering on, oh, we're not going to tell you what's going to happen next time. Our brain hates that, right? Which is why we tune in next week. Same way with our brain. When we ask ourselves great questions, and we're like, how might I become a better father and a better husband without taking away from my career? Because that's what other people think, is they're like, well, I'm going to have to take from my career. I'm like, you can, but you don't have to. If you decide I want to still own my career, but I want to be a better father, like, how might you do both? And then you put it out there into the universe and you find it. So that's where it came from me. It came through a podcast. I know some people it comes through books. Some people it comes through word of mouth. Some people it comes through BSS, which is our behavioral science services with LAPD. Like, some of it comes through them. Like, some of it comes through therapy. There's so many different things. But if you're not open to like asking yourself, like, who has the answers? Who can help me in this? Then you're not going to find it. Even it's going to be out there the whole time, and you just won't find it. So really, I don't like to talk necessarily about the exact tactics to do, because there's not a one-size-fit-all anything. It's just you program your mind to ask yourself great questions, and you'll find the answers on the outside.
And that was the purpose of my question, because not one thing is ever going to work for everybody. What works for you may not work for me. And so we each have to find our own path. But you hit on the most important point, in my opinion, is be open to looking for the path. If you keep those walls up, like we talked about earlier, keep your ego in there and not put your ego in check, think, oh, I could get through all this on my own, you're not going to find those paths.
100%.
So you found the Mastermind program. That led you to not simply use it to improve yourself, but it took you to the next level of now wanting to give back. What was that catalyst?
So that was a lot around my health journey. So initially, when I had started on my health journey, I had lost weight. People saw my before and after pictures. They asked me a lot of questions. How did you do that? How did you make this? Really what they wanted to do is like, what did you eat and what exact workouts did you do? They always want that, right? And I very much hesitate now to tell people. And the reason why is because when that thing doesn't work, and here's the reason why I like asking questions rather than giving specific advice, is because if I give specific advice, like the answer is contained in that sentence. Meaning if that doesn't work, there's something wrong with you, or there's something, we just beat ourselves up about it, right? Like it's never going to happen for me. But when I ask a question, the answers are infinite, right? It's a matter of like a science experiment. Oh, I'm going to try this workout. I'm going to try this way of eating. I'm going to try this supplement. And if it doesn't work out, oh, it's cool. Let me try something else, right? Because I've seen people who've lost weight from wrapping their body in like a little body wrap to every way possibly imaginable. It has to really be congruent with you and what you want, right? So it's the power of just like asking those great questions, asking the questions so that you can find those infinite number of answers and then not hold it against yourself if it doesn't go right. Does that make sense? So what was your question?
Mike, you found the Mastermind Project and going from seeking a mentor to then jumping that bridge and actually, okay, now I've found my path. I want to now start giving back to people.
100%. So it started with the whole health and fitness. And that was like, people were coming to me and asking me questions about how did I do this? And I really wanted to help people, but what I thought was to tell them exactly what they needed to do in order to achieve it. I hadn't risen to the level where I'm at now, where I know how to ask powerful questions to get them to find those answers so that they can find the one that works for them. So in the beginning, it was like, oh, let me tell you what to eat and let me tell you the workouts.
Did you primarily focus just on the fitness aspect, though?
I did. Because that was something that I had conquered, and the family and the health and the connection with my wife, I felt like I did not have any control over at that moment. I wasn't that model person. For me, and I know it says it in my book, it says the tactical guide to get you to show up and earn the right to be a leader of leaders. For me personally, I don't feel like I have the right to lead people if I'm not living that life myself yet. I don't like to be the person who's like, hey, let me give you some advice on this thing that I've never done before and I've never struggled through, but I'll help you get through it, right? So at that moment, I was like, well, I have to really be model the behavior first before I start helping people through it. That's not the case anymore, but I was really like, I have to absolutely do it first. So while I had succeeded in my health, that was a big thing. Like when people see it before and after, they're like, oh, what is it you're doing? And so I started to help people there while I was becoming a better father and a better husband. And once I started to develop there, then I sort of meshed the two, which is kind of weird, right? You're in if you're in a mastermind revolving around health and fitness, and then I bring in the aspect of family too, it has a little bit different feel. You probably don't go and connect with people when it comes to like health and fitness, and they start talking about how to become a better father, a better husband. But for me, it like really stuck because I really enjoyed talking about family even more than health and fitness. That was kind of like that catalyst that got me started. And of course, it's important because it builds all of the other foundations, right? If you're strong foundation in your health, then you can carry over the energy and all that stuff to the other areas. But I kind of mesh these two together where I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't want to just talk about health and fitness. It's important and I'll still sprinkle it in. But I also have this family transition that I'm making in terms of like becoming a better father and a better husband. What do you guys think if I bring this in here? And there was a lot of people who were like, yes, we would love for you to be able to do that. And so I basically just started to mold that together into the new mastermind that I was running at the time that wasn't just focused on health and fitness, but it was also like the health and fitness of your marriage, the health and fitness of the connection with your kids. And it was a little nerve-wracking at first because I was still messing it up. But to this day, I still mess it up. But it's also the thing that people come to me for, right? Most of the time people come to us because we've created a business based off of the things we've screwed up in our life, right? It's probably not the things that we've done first right. Hey, you did that right. Let me come pay you for it. No, it's like, I screwed this up so many times. Let me tell you the 10 different ways that I did that wrong, so that way you don't have to go down that path too. So it was kind of like a mixture of that. And then, of course, business came into play and career came into play. Leadership came into play later. But primarily in the beginning, it was just the health and connecting with your family better.
So we've mentioned it now a couple times. The Mastermind program, what is it and who operates it?
Ooh, great question. Okay. So just a mastermind in general is just a group of people who share similar values and goals, who are heading in a direction, but there's generally a leader who's a few steps ahead of everybody else. Now, the power of a mastermind is that everybody has different strengths, right? They bring different strengths to the table. Some people are really good at health and fitness. Some people are good with family. Some people are good with whatever. And when you put them together into a room and you have a facilitator who can ask powerful questions, everybody can experience exponential growth. It's kind of like the difference between reading a book and then having everybody read the same book, because here's the thing, like you're going to be seeing it with a different set of eyes. Like different people are going to be in different positions when they're reading the book. Different things are going to stand out to them. And then just getting together to kind of like share the wins, share like what didn't go well, share also like what they grew through, what they have found has worked. It's just a collective group of people that not only can share that, but they can keep everybody motivated, keep everybody moving forward, keep everybody like continuing to grow. And so that's kind of like the philosophy. If you read any of the like really old school personal development books like Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill, he talks a lot about this, about the mastermind, about putting people together who are just like really powerful minds who are around this specific subject, and just the things that happens. I mean, I can't even explain it, what a call is like when you have the ability of like asking questions, maybe doing some type of training, and then just opening the floor and allowing everybody to come in and share things that have worked and haven't worked and what they used last week and all this kind of stuff. And you basically, instead of you growing by yourself, you're kind of like exponentially growing as a team. And it's much harder for you not to show up. It's much harder for you to just give in when there's other people who are there on your team who are not only rooting for you, but they're like checking in and saying, hey, what's going on today? How are things going for you? Are you still taking this path? And when you have that buy-in as a team, it allows you to not only show up, but it shows you get to show up like an entirely different level and learn things that you would have never learned before, because there's just so many amazing humans who are on that team. And so mastermind teams are not just related to like what I do. There's mastermind teams, like we said, for fathers, for husbands, for police officers, for firefighters, I know of mastermind teams for a lot of people, and just finding that you are in congruence with what their values are, because you're going to be all heading in that same direction. You're going to be growing in that same direction. That's what's most important.
Do they meet virtually or in person?
Okay, so some people do meet in person. We meet virtually. So I have mastermind team members from all over the United States. We get on a certain day. And everybody runs masterminds a little bit different. The way that I run it is we meet on Sunday mornings. We have a topic that we're going to be talking about. Generally, what I do is I have 6 months worth of growth that they're going to be experiencing. This time it is physical, mental health was the first month. The second month was family relationships. Third month is leadership. Fourth month is using what we call the push method, really learning how to develop yourself and ask powerful questions, how to coach yourself in the moment. Like when your kids do something and instead of reacting to it, taking a moment to be able to coach yourself into doing the thing that you know you need to do so you don't have to apologize later. So every single month has a specific topic that we're going to really tackle, with the intentions of you hitting whatever goal you set in the beginning of the mastermind. So basically it's kind of set up so that way as you're growing, you're heading in the direction of what the goal is that you set when you first join the mastermind team. And so I will do training. I will teach them different things that I've learned along the way, what they can do, what they shouldn't do. And then basically we set up the stage so that they can ask each other great questions so they can level up the answers that they're getting inside of the group. Then they'll go on throughout the week, check in through the app that we have, let me know what some of the things they're doing, some of the things that came up, some of the things that maybe pissed them off that week, some different ways of like really rethinking things that they're kind of like struggling with, and really keeping them on track throughout the week, and then meeting again on that next Saturday. So it's kind of like this rinse and repeat thing where every time you get off on a Sunday, everybody's like fired up, they're ready to go. They've got their like plan for that whole entire next week, and they're like ready to go. Instead of like just hoping that things are going to happen, they actually have a plan to follow, and they're able to stop themselves going down the path of self-sabotage when it kind of comes up. Because that's really what tends to get most of us off track is this self-sabotage, that asking ourselves terrible questions like, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this working? Like there's no positive answers that come from there. That's generally what people will do. They'll start asking themselves those questions and it'll get them to be derailed. But when they're on a part of a team like that, when we see that that's happening, we'll make sure that we get them back on track so they continue to take the right actions and produce and create the results that they want to create.
So I want to get into being a push coach, but just taking a step back real quick. For somebody who's now interested in looking into the Mastermind program, where's the landing point for them to at least start their journey?
It's this book. So Mastering Your Life Through Self-Coaching is a powerful starting tool to understand not only the philosophies that we talk about inside the group, but really to get yourself in alignment with what's really important to you. Like when people ask me what it is that I do, like the simplest way that I can describe it is like I help people identify what's most important to them, and then I help them actually show up and be in alignment with that. Because I know for me personally, I used to say family was important. I used to say health was important, but I would never show it through my actions. It would always be like, this season's too busy. There's too many things going on. I've got to, later when this happens and the kids go back to school and it's an entirely different thing when you're able to identify what's most important to you and then start taking actions in congruence with that. And that's really what this book is. It kind of asks you some powerful questions to find out what you really want in life. And what I mean by that is like a lot of times we don't take the time to think about that. Like, what do you want your life to look like? Like if you were to think about you and your wife, like what do you want your marriage to look like? Like really, what would success in this life look like to you? A lot of times it's based off of what everybody else has said, right? To get into these units or to live in this certain kind of house or whatever. But sometimes when you get into that, like what do I want? It's really doesn't have anything to do with that. And so first identifying that and then asking yourself powerful questions about like, why is that even important or meaningful to you? So for me, one of the questions was when I was really developing and trying to figure out like how do I have this exit strategy from my police career is I started to see the power of the people that I was helping in the mastermind teams. I would get them to, I still remember this message. One of the guys in the group, he's one of the people who works overtime every single weekend. He's on the SRT, the SWAT team, all this kind of stuff, right? And we were talking to him about family and really like he had a 2-year-old at the time and really like connecting with them and having a moment to actually spend with his 2-year-old daughter. And I remember when he came into one of the trainings one day, he was like, "Hey, Mark, I just want to let you know, like on Friday, like I had a date set up for just me and my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter, and work called. And they said, I absolutely need you to be there. We have a search warrant, all this stuff." And he said, I told them no. And he said, it felt so terrible. He's like, until I got down on the floor and I started to like really connect with my daughter and we started to play, he was like, I would have given that away for some money in my bank account. He's like, I will never forget that moment again because it gave me the opportunity to connect with her and totally not even have to do all of these extra hours over there. And they totally even forgot about the fact that I had told them no. He's like, that was so powerful to me that this not only did it show me that it's possible that I can tell them no, because so many times we have these stories like, if I tell them no, they're going to fire me or they're going to do all this stuff. But also like it made me feel great because I was in alignment with my actual priorities because I want to be the father who's there. And so that story was like, for me, I was like, holy shit, like there's a lot of people who don't have that story because they think it's their work. Now, here's the thing. I used to blame work for doing that. However, if there's other people in the field or there's other people at work who don't have that happen to them, guess what? It's not the job, okay? It has to do with us and how we react to the job. The reason why I think that and I believe that is because I can control that. I can control how I react to the job. There's going to be times when, 2 years ago, we had the riots. I didn't have any choice but to be at work 13 days in a row, right? But the other times I do have a choice. And so I let my boss know, like, hey, I really appreciate this job. I really appreciate the opportunities that we have here, but I want to let you know my family is a huge priority. And I'm not going to say yes if you call me in overtime. I know you have to, because that's just like the pecking order. But I want to let you know that unless it's absolutely imperative, I'm not going to work here. And it's because if you want me to be the best that I can be here, I need to make sure that I have my family and my health all in alignment here. And just explaining that was like that freeing moment. But it wasn't the job that did this stuff to me. It wasn't the job that, which I'll tell you later, I developed what's called Crohn's disease. It's an autoimmune disease because I'm this kind of person who is just completely stressing myself out from working. But it wasn't the job that did that. It was me that was kind of doing that. And what it does is it actually gives me the ownership back. So it allows me the ability of changing that. So when I realize that I can take ownership of that, I can help other people take ownership of having more moments like that with their 2-year-old, that fueled me to go, you know what? It is worth it for me to make this transition out so that I can help more dads in that specific moment, because who knows if he would have ever had that opportunity of doing that? Who knows if he would have been sparked to do that with somebody else? I don't know, but I'm glad that I got the opportunity of being there. And number 2 is I'm glad that he was ballsy enough to listen to what I said, because I've told people to do things many times. I've described so many times and they never do anything, right? But he took that action. And because of that, like he realizing that he now has that power to do that, was so fulfilling to me that I was like, okay, this is what I need to do and spend more time doing, because this is like so impactful, because now when he goes into work, he's going to be on his A game when he's there, because he's like, hey, I'm taking care of home and I'm taking care of work. So I felt like not only would it be a good transition out of my police career, but I'm actually still giving back to the police career. So that's kind of like how it framed in my mind, because I was looking for an answer to how do I get out of my police career, but still give back to the community, so it doesn't feel like I'm getting out and like running and jumping ship, if that makes per se. So that was the question I asked myself. And that's when that presented itself. And I'm like, okay, this is what I need to do.
Just one thing I want to hit on before we move on from this. It's about striking balance. Mm-hmm. Many of us are in these jobs and we like the 100 mile an hour aspect of the work. Mm-hmm. And you bring up a great point. It's at tomorrow, if you're not there, that hole in that drop in that bucket is going to fill. Mm-hmm. Don't get it wrong. They're not going to miss you when you're gone. But the only thing I would say is it's equally important, in my opinion, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. Mm-hmm. You need to give as much to your family as you give to work, and be that guy that says it's okay to tell your boss, hey, I can't work overtime today. But at the same token, if you completely go the opposite extreme and you're never there for work, is that not feeding that little bit that drives and makes you better? Does that make sense?
It does. And you're right. When it comes to like, and I don't like using the word balance per se, because it's kind of like this thing where you're going through seasons, right? And some things sometimes deserve more of this. If you're going through some stuff at home, maybe you need a little bit more time over here. But you're right. Like so many times we think that when we want to grow in one area, we have to put the other areas on the hold, and you don't. I mean, if there's anything that I can hope that people take away from this, is there's a way to do both. Just ask yourself, how can I do both? And you will find that answer, because I'm not saying this because I feel like I want to do less at work. I still am showing up at work at the way that I want to show up. I can't not do that. Like I can't just be that person who sits in the back of the row and just doesn't respond to any calls or anything. I can't be that person. It's like in me, I'm a type A personality. So when I'm there, I'm giving it 100%. But at the same time, it's not at the cost of the other stuff that I have to do. So really asking yourself like, okay, what is most important to me and how can I really do both with excellence? You'll start to get those answers. Those answers will start showing themselves. But 100%, even going the opposite direction, right? You have people who just go all in with their health and they let their career or they let their family or they let whatever. That's never the answer. I mean, you could choose that answer if you want to, but remember, it's your choice. You're not making that thing ruin your life. You're making the decision yourself. And when I was able to find inside that that's what I had done, I had made that decision. I had made the decision to let my son down. I had made the decision to like not be the best father and best husband that I could possibly. I had made the decision to make myself unhealthy. It wasn't the fact that I was working all these hours. When I took ownership of that, that's when I had the ability of actually changing it, of actually saying, okay, that's behind me now. No word. It's not going to help me to beat myself up by it. And now what? What am I going to do next? What's the next thing that I need to do? And then it just started to get me on this mission of like finding the answers, because there's always answers out there. And when you have yourself and you're open to finding those answers, you'll find them.
So going back to the Mastermind program, mm-hmm. What is a push coach?
Oof. So a lot of people know about life coaches. Life coaches is something that has happened recently. I went through my own certification when it comes to life coaching. Life coaching is the power of asking great questions to basically show the person what's going on in their mind and why they're actually creating this experience for themselves. And I can give you some examples of that. But the difference between that and push coaching is life coaching basically is me showing you why you're creating what you're creating in your life by the questions you're asking yourself, by the thoughts that you're having that are pre-programmed in here, limiting beliefs, stuff like that. What push coaching is a mixture of life coaching and performance coaching, which means after you get to see like, oh, this is the reason why I'm experiencing it this way, I ask you a question that will figure out how you want to show up next time. What's a different thought that you can think that will help you to like really take you down this path that you want to go on? Let me give you an example. Okay. So this is a good one because it's actually happened. And I've mentioned this on a couple different podcasts. So my son, when he gets older, he's not gonna enjoy this. So, my son, all of us are sitting at the dinner table, right? We're sitting down, we're eating. My son has this thing where he thinks it's cool to like just burp, like really loud. And when he does that,
doesn't every young boy think that though?
Wait, you just beat me to it. So when he does that, my instincts goes back into when I was a kid. And I start to think, if that was me when I was young, I would have got backhanded. Is he disrespecting us? Like, did I not teach him any manners? And here's the thing too, like he does that. And now I'm making it mean something about me. Now I'm like, I'm a bad parent. I must have not taught him the right way, right? How many of you guys have kids where you're out in public, you expect them to act in a certain way, and if they don't, that means something bad about you. If they're running around the store, that means something about me. It doesn't. It means they're 13. They're running around the store. That's what I did when I was 13, right? And so that initial reaction to me was like...
No, you were working 14 jobs when you were 13.
That's right. You're right. So the initial response to me was like, oh, he's disrespecting me? Have I not taught him any manners? As a result of that, in my body, I have this feeling of like anger and frustration. As a result, I lash out at him. I start taking action. I said, hey, don't do that. Go up into your room. That's a sign of disrespect. Didn't I teach you anything? And then he storms off. He gets upset. He closes the door. And the end result is actually disconnection, right? Not only is he frustrated at it, I'm frustrated at it, and we're separated, right? I'm not even able to communicate with him and explain to him anything. So in fact, I am not teaching him good manners, because how good of a manner is it for me to lash out at him and to throw him in his room, right? Oh, that's how you deal with issues, right? You yell at the other person, you tell him to go upstairs. What kind of behavior am I modeling as a dad, right? And so in that moment, that's kind of like what happened. But see, understanding the philosophies of life coaching is like, okay, I created that myself. Because in reality, if he's sitting at the table and he burps, in some countries when you burp, it's actually a sign that the food is good. And as a matter of fact, you said this earlier, like sometimes it's a 13-year-old and he's here and he just wants to make a joke. That's just what he does, right? But see, I made this whole interpretation in this story in my mind that made it mean something about me, which got me angry, right? And so what I would do is I would sit down and I would go, okay, what is a different way that I can think about this? How about like, this is actually a great opportunity to model the behavior of how he could react when he has a situation like this when he gets older, right? Or it could be an opportunity for me to teach him that like somebody else can't make you feel a certain way. Like he can't make me get angry. I get to choose whether or not I get angry, right? Or another way would be like, oh, this is actually a great opportunity to teach him this before we get out in public next week, when we go out to eat. So there's so many different things that I could focus on. And if I do that, I'm just going to be like, hey, buddy, that was funny, but like it is a little bit disruptive. So if you could just not do that, that'd be cool. And he'd be like, oh, okay, cool. And then we go about having our day. So many times we feel like we got to teach somebody a lesson, but ultimately what happens is it creates like not only the disconnection, but how many more minutes away from doing whatever we wanted to do, right? As opposed to just sitting there as a family and just striking up conversations. One of the other things I could think of, like he's 13 years old. I would have done the same thing. That's not a big deal. It's not a big deal to me. So then you just move on, right? But instead we kind of like spin the wheels on it, send him to his room, disconnection, all that kind of stuff. And it's the difference between it happening automatically to us and us thinking that your son made you mad versus, oh, this is just the way that I interpreted it, right? This is just what I decided that my thought was going to be about this situation. And being able to take a step back, then I would go into push coaching and go, hey, what is a way that you can actually make this be more of a connection moment rather than disconnection? Like what's something that you can think about in that moment that will help you to realize, hey, you know what? I just got to be cool and calm and be the role model that this boy needs in his life right now. And when you can really figure out those, the next time that it happens, who knows? Maybe you will go down that path again and then go, damn it, Mark told me about this, right? Or maybe it's going to be like, wait, this is one of those moments. Okay, let me take a breath. All right. And then you'll realize right after that, right after you handle it the way you wanted to, you're like, that wasn't really so hard. As a matter of fact, like, I really feel like this is going way better than it has before. And it really has a lot to do with what you're thinking. It has a lot to do with those stories that you're telling yourself about what happened. So I know you asked me what is a push coach. It's that life coach. Like, if I was just a life coach, I would be like, okay, let me show you why you're creating this disconnection. Okay. It's because you're having this thought of like, hey, he should know better. Right. And that's the reason why you're creating this. Okay. Can you see that? And you'd be like, yes. Okay. See you next session. A performance coach is like, okay, that's what you did. Do you want to do something different? Yes, I want to do something different. Because as a life coach or a push coach, you don't want to force somebody to do something they don't want to do. If somebody's like, I'm pissed off and I want to be pissed off, I'm like, cool. That's cool. It doesn't matter to me. But if you don't want to be pissed off, if you don't want to yell at your son, if you don't want to grab that food that you don't want to grab, if you don't want to hit the pause button or the snooze button, let's work out a plan. And I can create that plan. And it's not a plan of like, oh, hey, put the alarm clock on the other side of the room. Like, maybe that'll work for some people. But how about this? How about if you have an alarm clock and you're like, you know what? I want to get up and I want to exercise. But every single day I just keep hitting the snooze button. How about this? How about if I ask you, like, what is important or meaningful to you about getting up and exercising? What kind of impact will that make in the world if you don't feel like doing something, yet you do it anyway? What kind of role model would you be for your kids if the alarm goes off, you get up and you exercise, and then you showed them the way of not just when they feel like it, but actually when they want to? What are you giving up if you hit that snooze button and you never get that opportunity of exercising and feeling great and having that energy? What are you going to be able to do that you're not capable of right now if you get up and you're able to exercise? Like, what is that going to make your day look like? And see, when you fuel yourself with these questions, you're like, wow, I got to get up. Like, I need somebody's, what's the word? Somebody needs me on my A game today, right? It's like, I can't push this button. Are you serious? Like, with all of these things that I have going for me, like, I have to get up. I get to get up and to do this. And it can just totally reframe it just by asking yourself that question in the morning time. Is like, instead of hitting that snooze button, thinking, which most of us think like, man, I deserved this. I worked some extra time yesterday. I'll get to it a little bit later. Those are the thoughts that fuel you to go back to sleep. And then what do you do when you wake up? Oh man, I should have done that. I screwed up. I'm stupid. I can never do this. I told you this would never work. I'm not disciplined enough. And in reality, it has nothing to do with that. It's just you didn't stop and go, what's a question to get my ass out of bed? Okay, who needs me on my A game today? Okay, those people do. Time to get up. And you just get up because you're pulled by yourself, not from something outside. You're pulled by yourself because you ask yourself that powerful question. So that's the process of push coaching, is finding those questions that are going to fuel you that don't necessarily mean anything to me, but they're specific to you, if that makes sense. Because I don't know what's going to get you to show up, but what I can is I can ask you questions and we can find out what's important or meaningful to you. That's one of my biggest ones, is like, what is important or meaningful to you about even doing that, right? It could be our police career. If somebody's starting to get burned out from their police career, I'm gonna be like, what about being a police officer is important or meaningful to you? Like, what kind of impact is that making on you, on your family, in the world? And when you reframe that, it's much harder for you to like poo-poo it, to go like, no, this is the reason why I do what I do. This is the reason why I signed up. This is the kind of impact that I made. This is what I'm showing my family. This is what I'm helping with the community. And now you're coming from a different place. I call it our heart voice. You're coming from a different place of like purpose, of potential, of abundance, of hope. And you're like, yes, I'm going to go out there and do that. And so that's really what not only push coaching, but what the book is about, is like getting yourself to ask yourself those questions, to get yourself to really show up, like how, on a level that you're capable of, which it's living inside of you. But so many times we keep our potential like under wraps. We don't realize and lift the lid of our potential because it's based off of like this past pre-programming and what automatically comes into our brain, as opposed to taking control over it and asking ourselves great questions.
Well, you bring up a great point too about, especially today with the state that law enforcement is in. And when we go to work each day, 2 of your 4 M's, mentoring and modeling, every one of us is a mentor, and we do it by modeling. Of course, the times are very tough right now, and it's a profession that is constantly getting berated by the media. But the way my take on it is it's our job to keep the good ones in the profession. Because if the good ones walk away, that may be a temporary, I'm away from it. But the thing is what's going to be the long-term ramification? And so I like your example of, if you see somebody at work who's maybe not in the best, you don't have to be a formal mentor, but just be present with them. So going forward, you chose to start making this a business for yourself. What year was that?
10 years ago, so 2012.
And what was the first thing you did? So now I'm getting your advice hat on for somebody who's thinking about, hey, I've gone down a path of something similar. I got myself at least what I feel kind of squared away. I want to take this into a business model. What was your first step?
What was my first step, or what advice would I give somebody if this was their first step?
What was your first step, and then what, maybe go backwards, and what would you do differently?
My first step was just kind of like really not asking people what they thought they wanted. It was me putting out whatever I thought they needed. So when you were in the, and this is a lot of it has to do with business tactics, which is why I would say, if I were to start off, number one, you got to be passionate about what you do, because it's going to be hell. It's not going to turn out the way you think it is. Whenever you start a business or anything like that, it's not going to end up just totally easy. You got to really love what it is that you're doing when you're helping, because you're going to run into that suck. But number two is like learning those business skills. So when you get into business, and when you've like achieved something in your life, you know what people need. Okay. So I talk a lot about asking questions. Nobody really on this podcast is like, I can't wait to find somebody who can ask me questions. But when I talk about like what they actually feel like they need, like people who are experiencing burnout, that's a lot of what the people that I deal with. They're burned out. They're feeling like they've just got to work. They get to the point where they're like, oh, you know what? I know I need to make my family a priority, make my health a priority, but I just don't have time right now. It's a different season. Like down the line, I'll be able to do this. And then they work all day. They get home. They're exhausted. They can't spend any time with their family. They're a zombie on their days off. They're working midnight shift. They finally get 1 or 2 days off. They have to sleep, and then they have to rinse and repeat and go back to work. So those people, they're like, okay, I'm tired of being told what to do. Right? Like telling me to do more is not the answer, but that's typically where high performers do. We're like, oh, I just got to do more. Oh, so let me cut off more from my schedule and actually go into the gym. Right? And so when I can paint that picture of like what people actually think they need, actually what they need to do is remove things, right? They don't need to add stuff. They need to start removing things that are not as important as what their main priorities are. Right? So when I talk to people about like what it is that they need, what I tell them is they need to stop doing everything. They need to make sure that they figure out what's the most important activities, do those, and eliminate the rest. I'm not necessarily telling them what I know is the answer, which is the power of like going into mindset, the power of like asking yourself great questions, the power of who you surround yourself with, because nobody necessarily is going to see that as like, oh my God, I can't wait to jump in for that. But they can see you need to remove things from your life. And I follow what's called the 80-20. Have you ever heard the Pareto principle? What it basically says is that when it comes to results in your life, you get 80% of the results from 20% of the actions that you do. You get 20% of the results from the other 80% of the actions you do. So when you're a high performer, what you have to do is you have to identify those 20% of the most important activities that produce 80% of your results, and you need to double down on them, and you need to eliminate or outsource all the other stuff. Let me give an example. So when it comes to family, all right, let's say you want to become closer with your family. First off, our brain can get us into thinking, well, it's going to take hours and hours and hours to do that. It doesn't, right? So think about like, what are the 80% of the activities that you're doing that are only producing 20% of that connection with your family? That's probably when you're driving places. It's probably when you're watching TV together. It's probably when you're just sitting down doing laundry. It's probably when you're doing housework, and they're just around right in the peripheral. And you're like, yeah, I'm being a father. And you're not really. You're just there. And it's moving the needle a little bit because it's better than you not being there, but it's not really moving the needle. And when you say, okay, I want to be an incredible father, what is the 20% of activities that I can do that will produce 80% of the connection with my kids? For my son, it's playing tickle. For my daughter, it's going out on a walk. It's like disconnecting from all electronics, sitting down with a board game and playing Sorry with them. That's really where like that real big 80% of that connection piece comes. And it takes 15 or 20 minutes to do. And when you identify that, you're like, oh, I can really just double down on these things to create even more connection, but it doesn't mean that I have to do less, or it doesn't mean I have to do more. I can actually do less. It's the same thing with work. It's the same thing with business. It's the same thing with like connection with your wife. There's things that are the most important. And so when I can show somebody like, hey, this is what you need and you need to do less, then they're open to like seeing what it is that I'm doing, see how I do it, because I can kind of explain to them, this is where I was. And then they feel like, wow, he really knows what it's like to be here. Then I can actually show them, hey, let me show you the power of a mastermind team and the power of asking yourself great questions to figure out what those most important activities are. So from a business perspective, it's what I wish I had known is that I don't lead with what I know they need. I need to lead with what they think they need. And by doing that, I can bridge that gap and then I can actually show them what they need. So really, it's a lot of business strategies, because it's not just like, hey, I'm going to put up my business and then people are going to come pay me, because that doesn't happen, right? And so
that doesn't happen?
That doesn't. And if you do find the person on this podcast, can you please send them my way? There'll be a nice royalty bonus on that. But it doesn't work that way. There's so many business strategies that I had to learn and understand, and I'm still growing with right now, to be able to have this opportunity not only to serve people, but at the same time to be able to support myself when I'm at home, when I no longer have like my income from my police career. Does that make sense?
Yes. When did the podcast become a component of your business model?
So early on, when I first got into my first podcast, because it's been through 2 different renditions, it was called the First Responder Fitness Podcast. And it was one of those things where, once again, I just threw stuff together and I just started to do it. It had no component of my business. It was just like, hey, I'm going to get on here. I'm going to share my best strategies, my best tactics, and just leave it out here for everybody in the world.
Fitness driven?
Just fitness driven. And so I was just putting out a ton of like fitness content. And this is that reason, like I was saying in the beginning, when I was just telling everybody what to do. And if telling people were the thing to do, wouldn't everybody just Google it and they would instantly be able to do it all, right? It'd be like, oh, let me just Google this. It's not just about telling, which is why that podcast really didn't do so amazing. I would get feedback all the time where people are like, that was awesome. I felt so great. I felt so motivated. Oh, and I didn't do it. I didn't do any of it, but I promise you next week when I show up, I'm going to be so excited. I'm going to do something, right? And they would never do it because I wasn't attacking their mindset. I was attacking them by telling them what's called coaching the action line. Oh, these are the things you have to do. But here's the thing. When you understand the philosophies of life and push coaching, you realize it's not that somebody has to tell you what to do. It's that there's got to be a thought there that's going to fuel you to feel a certain way. And when you feel a certain way, that will get you to take action. Because we can be told all the time about what we need to do. If we really don't believe it's possible for us, if we really think it's going to be a waste of time, we're not going to do any of that. It doesn't matter who tells us what to do. And so that podcast initially was, hey, let me tell everybody what to do. And I realized very quickly that not many people would do it. There would be a small percentage of them that would actually do it and say, oh my God, you changed my life. But most people were like, I'm just so pumped up, but I didn't do any of that.
I'll do it next Monday.
That was frustrating big time, but yeah.
And so you said it's gone through 3 iterations?
Yeah.
What is it today?
It's called Master Your Mindset with Coach Marc. All about mindset. Because that's really ultimately what it's about. Like if you don't get your mindset on point, like the other stuff is irrelevant. And I mean, the way I like to describe it to police officers is when you go on a search warrant. So you have the mindset and you have the tactics. Okay. So before you meet in a briefing, right? And they're like, okay, here's the location we're going to go to. Here's where you're going to be on the stick. Here's what you're going to be like in charge of. Like if you're going to be on point, if you're going to be the photographer, everything that's going to happen. Right. But what do they also do? They also talk to you about, okay, let's talk about the history of the suspects. Let's talk about who could possibly be there. Let's talk about let's keep our head on the swivel, right? We got to make sure that we watch each other's back. Make sure you watch your mouth in the language, right? Because there's potentially going to be cameras that are in here. They're wanted for these crimes, but they've done this kind of stuff. There could be kids that are there. And really what they're doing is they're giving you the tactics of like who's going to be on the stick, how you're going to get there, the location. But really they're building up this mindset of like, you've got to be prepared. Like you're got to be there and you got to be on your A game. Because if somebody on back security is not paying attention and then somebody's able to get outside, like there's a breakdown there, right? And so they have both the tactics, which is like what to do, and also the mindset of like, hey, be prepared because this is what can happen. We're all going to be wearing our helmets. We're all going to be wearing our vests. And it really frames it perfectly, right? So you have both the tactics and the mindset. And when they marry up, that's when you have like that perfect synergy between it. And that's really what it is. It's the same with fitness, same with all of these things. When you have like that right mindset of like, hey, like this is how we're setting ourselves up for success in this. This is why it's important to us. This is like the impact that this is going to make for us and for the world. And also here's the things that you can do to make it so that it's like that seamless transition. Both of those things come together and then you have success, right? And then of course, what do we do afterwards? We debrief. And we go, hey, yeah, this person didn't do this or this didn't happen over here. Oh, what happened inside? And we're kind of like all sharing. That's a mastermind. We're all sharing like, oh, I was inside. I found some dope that was under here and it was over here. And you're like, oh, really? And now you're like, everybody's experience, right? Kind of like goes up higher. That's really what that mastermind team is, the after debrief of like, hey, this is kind of what happened. So that's kind of how what it actually looks like when I talk about the tactics and the mindset. Because if you don't have that mindset, you're just going to have like a piece of paper that says who goes in first and who goes in second, right? And everybody's going to be on an entirely different page. You don't know what your mission is. You don't know what you're there for. And you're going to have some people who are getting hurt, right? And it's the marriage of both of those that really allow you to not only effectively work there, but also in any of those other areas of your life too.
What prompted you to write a book?
People telling me over and over and over again, like when I would be on podcasts, when they would hear me on mastermind calls, because I'm an introvert, to be honest. Like I am the kind of person, I love to be at home.
That comes across clearly.
I'm the person who likes to be at home. I say no to everything that has me leave home, which by the way, it must mean something. Kudos for you too, right? Because I drove 2 hours here. But really, like, I'm the introvert where I'm like, hey, I will help as many people as I possibly can, but I need to recharge by myself. I need to be alone. So, when you go to conferences and stuff like that, it's kind of like, for me, it's really awkward because I need to go back inside. So I'm not the kind of person who's like, I don't like to talk about myself. I like to ask people great questions, which is why this interview is kind of hard for me because I'm like, wait, he's asking me amazing questions. This is really weird. So I like to make it about the other person and not necessarily about me. So it had never crossed my mind to write a book, but people kept telling me, you need to put this in a book. You need to put this in a book. You need to put this in a book. And my head voice was like, every like Navy SEAL, every like high level commander, there's so many people who are writing book. Like who's going to read my book? That's what happens in our head voice. Our head voice wants to keep us trapped because it's like all the past things. It'll keep you safe. You won't have to do anything. And then finally somebody asked me, is like, you know what? There's some people out there who will never read that book. They'll never connect with those other people, but they'll connect with you and your story and the way that you tell it because you tell it differently than anybody else. And I kind of like thought about that. I'm like, you're right. It's kind of like me being selfish and not allowing my story to really help inspire or help other people. And really like when I feel that way, when I really want to show up and do something, I think about the impact that it'll make on other people. And if it's with my family, especially if I'm like, hey, this is going to impact my family, game over. I'm going to be doing it every single day of the week. But when somebody challenged me and they said, how many people can you help if your story never actually touches them? They never have the ability of reading it. And the answer is 0, right? It's just the people that I can talk to, right? Which is not as many people as I want to impact, right? So I'm like, you know what? I want to write this book. I want to make it, yes, it's steered more towards law enforcement because that's what I am. It's, I'm going on 20 years, but it's also for people that in all walks of life, because like I said, the power of being able to coach yourself by asking yourself these questions is extremely powerful, and it can be that universal leadership language so that you can take it into any aspect of the things you want to grow in.
So for somebody who's thinking they might want to write a book, how difficult is it to actually get it written and get it published?
That's a great question. So number one is I hired somebody to help me to put it out there. In terms of writing the book, because I had all of this stuff living inside of me. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years now, coaching people, not only with their health, but with their business, with their marriages, all that kind of stuff. It took me 6 days to write. So it was one of those things where I guess I had waited too long because once I started writing and the cursor was like blinking, I'm like, what am I going to write about? I'm like, I'll just start off like just telling a little bit of my story. And I looked up, and after like 6 days, there was like 32,000 words. I'm like, what in the world did this come from? And then it came with like moving things around and then making it look pretty and then going back to read it a couple million times. And then my wife always jokes around, like, I like to like use commas apparently. And I have like really long sentences with like 42 commas in it. So that's why I was like, okay, I need to get this edited by a professional. So I reached out to somebody who had written some books before, and he's like, oh yeah, let me connect you with this publisher who's going to be really helpful in terms of like putting it all together, making the cover look like however you want it to look like. And it really was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Once I gave it to them, they did some adjustments to it, took it back. I made some adjustments back to it because I wanted to make sure that when people read this, they are like, oh, okay, this is a police officer talking to me. Because sometimes when you're going through that process of editing, it kind of loses a little bit of your personality. I didn't want to lose that, even though it wasn't proper English. I decided I wanted me to be a part of this book too.
Yeah, this isn't a college English book.
It is not a college English book, and my wife still looks at it and goes, really? You've got 4 commas in this sentence. But yeah, it really wasn't as hard as I thought it was. And when people say that you have a book living inside of you, I think everybody does. I know sometimes we just go off and we think, you know what, who's going to read this or whatever. For anything, I was like, you know what, I'll put this down so that my kids could have it. When they get older, I can say, hey, this is something that your dad did. But really, it's kind of it's actually taken off a little bit where now people are getting it, they're reading it, and they're sharing it with other people. And it just goes back to that, how many people can you help if you never tell anybody about it, right? How many people can you help if you never create that business, right? If you're a law enforcement officer and you're like, you know what, this is what I was made to do. I was born to be a law enforcement officer. So maybe this other stuff isn't for me. How many people can you actually impact if you believe that story, right? If you actually say, you know what, that's true. Yeah, I could never do anything like that. So I would highly encourage anybody to just step out there and to do it, because so many people can be impacted by the way that you describe it, because we are all individuals. Even if somebody has a book on the same exact topic, it's going to be entirely different because it's a different way of us communicating and based off of our stories. There's somebody who really needs to hear your story, and don't keep it inside of you.
And we've made reference to it now multiple times. And for those listening, the book is called Mastering Your Life Through Self-Coaching, written by Marc Hildebrand. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's a small, easy read book. Yeah. It's something that you could keep on your desk, keep in your bookshelf, and just almost kind of refer back to it as an owner's manual or a user's manual. Right. Not some big, thick, I've got to devote, the next 3 weekends to try to get through this.
Yes.
You also did the audiobook, though, for it. Mm-hmm. How difficult was that process to sit and read your words into a microphone?
It was awkward. It was definitely awkward. Yes, reading your own book, it's entirely different level. When I was reading it, I was kind of actually visualizing a lot of these stories and stuff that had actually occurred. And just as you're reading, it's weird to then go back and listen to the book, right? And some of the stories and stuff, because, I'm a fast talker. And when you're doing a podcast and you have a production crew who's helping you do that podcast, they're like, Mark, you need to take a breath. You need to slow down. You are going way too fast. And I'm like, yeah, because this is my story. It's so easy for me to tell it. But yeah, it was really awkward to put it down on paper, to read a book that, first off, when you actually get the first book in the mail and you're like, holy shit, this is real. I didn't know if this is going to be a joke or whatever, but this is actually a legitimate book. And then having you read it, it's just this surreal feeling, but it is kind of awkward to just lock yourself in your room and tell your kids, hey guys, I need to read my book right now into this microphone, and probably clap a bunch of times, because they have you do that as you're going through the process of reading it. When you stumble over words, you say things incorrectly, you got to clap. And then afterwards, my family was like, Dad, you did a lot of clapping. I'm like, thanks guys. Thanks for the support.
You're
I really
cheering
appreciate
for yourself.
I got a cheering squad, but yeah, it was an experience in and of itself. I mean, it took it from the beginning to end, maybe 6 months for all that.
Did you find it difficult to stay, and I loosely call it a script, because when you're doing an audiobook, you're just reading what's in there.
Yep.
Being that you were telling your own story and you knew all of the details, did you find it hard not to go off track and go, let me add a little bit more in here?
So I had a conversation with the person who was doing my audiobook, and they were like, hey, you can 100% go off a little bit, but don't go way off. Yes, it is very hard for me to stay on point, because when I'm there, and see, here's the thing too. As I was writing this book, the reason why I wanted to keep it small is because I wanted it to be a universal book that people can go into no matter what it is they're struggling with, or whatever it is that they're holding them back, or whatever it is they want to grow in. Because I was starting to go down the path of let me tell the people how to get their health in alignment, and let me tell them a little bit more details about this. And then I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I need this to be a universal framework that people can go through, so that they don't feel overwhelmed by doing 82 million other things, right? My goal isn't saying, hey, let me give this book to somebody who's in the process of burning out and telling them they have to do 10 more things, right? And so I wanted to give them that framework. And so as I was reading it, I was like, no, I want to go down that framework. I want to tell them a little bit more about this. But it kind of kept me because the guy was like, hey, no, you have to keep this. You can go off a little bit and give it a little bit of personality, but you have to keep it very similar to the book. You can't just go off on a different, let me tell you, chapter 3A, this is the extra. No, he didn't allow me to do that. But besides that, it gave me they did give me some leeway. I hear that some people, some of the different companies, they don't. They say you have to read it word for word. And by the way, if you first start reading, I felt like I was in third grade again when they call you and they're like, Mark, okay, you read out loud. I couldn't read out loud for a while. You don't typically read out loud anymore, right? It was definitely awkward for doing that. But yeah, after a few times, I sort of got the hang of it and I stopped getting off script and it ended up turning out pretty good.
So going forward, what's the future for Mark?
Oof, great question. So I'm about to hit 20 in December of this year. I'm going to hit 20, and I'm doing the 20 and out. So initially, when I came out of the department, my plan was to do 33 and a half. So that's generally what, as LAPD, if you do 33 and above, you get a 90% pension. That changed when I stopped going into this, hey, I've got to do more. I've got to give it all to my career kind of thing. I realized that I could spend more time with my family, more time on my health, and do a great job on the job. But it also gave me this idea of like, what if I could actually spend more time at home, create a business around helping other first responders, other police officers who are struggling with burnout, struggling with like all of these things at home and whatnot. It gave me the idea of like, you know what if I just did 20 and out? Now 20 and out with LAPD, it's only half. You only get 50%. So I obviously would have to be able to make that up on the back end. So for me, I was like, okay, how might I retire and have not only a successful business, but one that I actually enjoy doing, and I get to spend more time with my family and my kids, get to pick them up, get to take them to school, get to have date days with my wife. I mean, I'm on vacation now for 4 weeks, and it's like incredible because like I get to take the kids to school, come home, spend time with my wife, go to the coffee shop, do things that husband and wife do. And it gives me like a glimpse into what that's going to be like when I do that. Now I do know, once I retire in December and make this, take this step into full-time coaching, I know there's going to be some things that are going to come up because I know for me personally, like I'm always the kind of person who's going. And you go from that to like, okay, you have your own business. Now you can work your own hours and you can do everything from home. I know there's going to be a transition piece there. I know because my wife experienced it too, because she was working full-time. She was working at UCLA Medical Center. Through the process of us coaching, we actually were able to get her to come home so she could spend more time with the family. And she had the same thing too. It was like this weird transition from having to go into work every day, see a boss, all that kind of stuff, to now being at home and being able to be her own kind of boss. So I'm actually looking forward to that transition. But yes, so at the end of December, I'm going to be full-time coaching and really helping to make an impact in a different way than I was before.
Do you and your wife work together with the coaching business, or are you running your own different companies?
That's a great question. So initially we started to work together, but we have separated. What I have found is a lot of times...
she got tired of carrying you?
She got tired of carrying me all the time. You know my story. No, it seemed like I attract a certain type of person in personality. I attract a lot of type A personalities, a lot of people who are like go-getters, say it the way it is, no filter, that kind of stuff. Who my wife was attracting was, she was attracting mompreneurs, people who were in, stay-at-home moms who were working their businesses and things like that. And they didn't necessarily fit in with some of the colorful people and language and stuff that sometimes happens in our environment. And so they felt a little bit more comfortable being in their own
Wait a minute,
mastermind.
Cops use foul language?
Yes, I know.
Shocker.
So she decided that she's going to create her own thing while still being a part of our group, because there are certain people who are like, hey, you know what? That is a little bit too aggressive for me, or that is a little bit too of anything for me. And I wanted to stay in my lane. I didn't want to feel uncomfortable about teaching the way that I teach, about saying things the way that I say. And so we decided, hey, you know what? We will have like this little bit of a separation. So she's working her coaching business and I'm doing mine. And plus our message is slightly different just because of our own stories and the things that we've all been through.
For us type A's, you bring up a good point. if you're seeking out a mentor, life coach, push coach, whatever you want to call it, somebody comes to you, if they don't feel that they connect with you, do you recommend that they go seek somebody else, or do you just grin and bear it and keep working with me?
Do not grin and bear it. Do not grin and bear it. Like I tell everybody, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and there's no coach that is everybody's cup of tea. If for some reason you don't connect with it, it's not that there's something wrong with them or something wrong with you. It's just there's no connection there. You've got to find somebody who you do have that connection with. And I want you to think outside of the box. I don't want them to have to look like and act like and be like you, but I want you to see that there's like some kind of connection there, because how far you go in that program has a lot to do with that. Some of it could be ego too. Is like, oh, you know what? Somebody has to know more than me, has to be higher than me, has to do all this kind of stuff. And you really want to check that stuff. But at the same time, you don't want to force it. It's the same way I say with books. Like, you probably have buddies who are like, oh, you should get this book. You should get this book. You should get this book. And you start to read it and you're like, this really isn't jiving with me. And some people force themselves to go through it. It's not the book for you. Pick something else. There's how many billions of books that are out there. Like, find that one. You're like, hey, I love this one. I love this message. I connect with a person. Then you read it, right? And of course, then you'll share that with somebody else and they won't necessarily like it. But really, don't force yourself to go through any mentorship like that. It's not going to really work out. Don't force yourself to read a book just because somebody else said something about it. Like, try and find something that you connect with. And yes, ego does have something to do with it, but you also don't want to try to force yourself through it, because there's no positives that come out of it. Just a whole bunch of wasted time and stuff like that. And to be honest, most of us, the coaches who run masterminds, we don't want anybody on our team who doesn't want to be there. Like, I have to deny people to get into my team probably more than I have to accept them, because I don't want somebody to come into my team that is not like in alignment with our mission and what our values and what our goals are, because it can totally throw off the entire thing. So it's important that you find a team that's right for you, but also that your team if you're the person who's creating this, because you can go out and create your own mastermind. You don't even have to join one. You could create one on your own, but just make sure you're very cognizant of who you're bringing in there, because the entire environment can change if you get one of the wrong people that's inside there.
What's your vetting process like?
I have a process. It's an application that somebody fills out to let me know about like what their life is like right now. Do they have a business? Are they in law enforcement? What's important or meaningful to them? Like, what is their specific goals they want to achieve over the next 6 months? What do they think is holding them back from actually achieving those goals? And I will be able to ask questions, because that's my thing. I'll be able to ask questions to find out, okay, this person, they're blaming everybody else in the world except for themselves. They're not taking ownership. They're not going to be a good fit for the team. Because if everybody's like, yeah, it's because of them and them and them and them and them, and they're pointing the fingers out, I can't help that. I have to, as a coach, I can't coach anybody that's not in the room. So if they are like, yeah, having a conversation like, yeah, my wife did this and my kids did this and this and this, I can't coach them. They're not in the room with me, right? And so it's not going to be very helpful for them. It's not going to be helpful for me either. So through that process of answering those questions, I'm able to see like, hey, this person is an amazing fit for our team. Let's move them into the mastermind. Or if not, I give them different directions. Like, I have different coaches that I'm like, hey, this would be a great coach for you to be with. This is another great mentor for you to be with. Or this is a great program for you to be with. And I'll always send them in a direction. I won't just say, hey, this isn't the fit for you. But really, by asking them those questions, I can see if they would be a good fit for the team.
So how do people get in touch with you? Because I know you're all various aspects of social media, but how do they find you?
If you go to mindsetwithmarc.com, that's where my podcast page is. It has all the different podcasts. It has a way to connect me. It has, if you click on the mastermind link, it has the survey for you to fill out. If there's somebody who's interested in learning a little bit more about like how I could help, or even if I have a direction that I can send them in, because these are the things that I own, but through these relationships that I've created, I've been able to connect with a whole bunch of different people who own entirely different areas that aren't necessarily my priorities. But if you fill out that application, I'll get back to you. I usually will send a video message to you, giving you some direction or figuring out like what the next best step is for you. And that's usually the best place to get a hold of me.
And just for clarification, you're M-A-R-C, not M-A-R-K.
That's right. I'm Mindset with Marc, M-A-R-C. That's right.
Any last words of advice for anybody listening?
Actually, real quick, and this is just for, number one is for you. Just acknowledge and appreciate how great of a communicator you are, because just seeing you here and actually listen to your podcast, I see how how great you are at listening and asking questions that show me that you're actually paying your time and attention, which is the most valuable resource anybody else can give you. So I just want to take a second not only to acknowledge and appreciate you as an interviewer, but all the energy and effort that it takes to put together a podcast like this. Having a podcast for about 6 years myself, I know how much energy and effort, and I know that somebody just goes and they push the podcast button and it immediately comes up, but they don't realize the amount of energy and effort and puts into it. I know that. So I just want to say thank you very much for putting the time and energy into this. It's a freaking incredible production that you have going on here. But I just want to say, if nobody else has told you,
this fantastic gym in my garage,
whatever it takes, this is the way the business works, right? You just throw stuff and you see what kind of sticks to the wall. But I appreciate it that you're putting all this energy and effort, and that you're not only a great listener, but you're great at asking questions. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best going forward, and enjoy your retirement.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.